Buenas tardes nuevamente con todos y todas ustedes. Reciban el más cordial saludo de parte de la Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, que los acoge en esta oportunidad para este evento en nuestra sede de San Isidro, el espacio que denominamos NOS. Tenemos en esta oportunidad, nos sentimos muy honrados por la presencia de la doctora Gosi Okongo Iweala, la directora general de la Organización Mundial de Comercio. Es todo un honor tenerla con nosotros. He podido, conocerla a través de su hoja de vida, que creo que muestra que es una mujer líder a nivel mundial, ¿no? Entonces, yo también como mujer, como representante del rectorado en esta oportunidad de mi universidad, me siento muy satisfecha de poder tener entre nosotros a la directora general de la OMC y poder también tener este espacio para poder intercambiar, escucharla a ella y a los ponentes que nos acompañan en torno al tema que va a desarrollar. Ella es una experta en economía del desarrollo y creo que el puesto que ocupa, además de haber sido ministra de Finanzas, la primera ministra mujer de su país, Nigeria, actualmente su mandato también creo que es una oportunidad de servir a los distintos países del mundo para beneficiar los intercambios comerciales y poder mejorar la calidad de vida de las distintas poblaciones. Lo dejo a Víctor Saco, quien es el organizador del evento, y bueno, les deseo una excelente jornada a todas y a todos, y agradezco especialmente la presencia de todos ustedes y de los ponentes que acompañan a la doctora en esta tarde.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Also in the panel are with us. Sorry. Is our ambassador, Ana Cecilia Gervasi, permanent representative of Peru to the international organizations based in Geneva. Also, Madame Mercedes Arauz. She's former Vice President of Peru, former Minister of Foreign and Trade and Tourism, and she's also affiliated with the University del Pacífico. Thank you. Mr. Diego Llosa, he's the Senior Export Manager of ADEX, the Association of Peruvian Exporters, also former Vice Minister of Foreign Trade. So thank you, Diego, for being with us. And last but not least, because he's also associated with the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, Mr. and Professor Fernando Pierola. He's Senior Counsel of the Advisory Center on WTO Law, ACWL, in Geneva, and also Professor of our Master Program in other universities. Gracias, Fernando. So the Director General of the WTO has been already presented in Spanish. So sorry for the translation in English. But and just let me introduce myself. My name is Victor Saco. We hold the WCP program, so the World Trade Organization's Chairs Program. It's a program from the WTO that help us to teach, to make over, for the events like this, to teach, to share with you the benefits of international trade, global trade for development. So in this moment, the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú holds the chair, but the mandate is not just for the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, as our Vice President knows, but also to all the universities who want to cooperate with us. So thank you also for the University of Lima to be with us, the University of Pacífico, the University Científica del Sur, Universidad de San Marcos, and all the universities that are present. So please, let's work together towards to achieve the benefits for everyone, as the WTO says, and as the DGs always has charged to us. Just to start, because you want to hear the panel, not me. The title of this panel is WTO role in achieving key global changes. Because, well, I don't know if you share this idea with me, but our planet is facing perils. Okay, not perils, maybe it's too much. Or let's say, or call it challenges. Those challenges that will affect our life as human beings or the normal life that we think we have for the moment. I'm talking about climate change, the viability of new technologies, access to natural resources, including fisheries and other agricultural products, also military conflicts, pandemics, youth and investment for the people who need it, among others. These challenges, believe it or not, are all related to trade. We like it or we don't like it. And the only multilateral forum the states have to discuss these matters is the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The WTO is celebrating his 30 years of existence next January. We are celebrating this year the Marrakesh Agreement of 1994. 30 years helping states and therefore citizens, global citizens, to achieve development. The last years, although, has also been challenging for the WTO. Lawyers, for those who are not lawyers, have been very enthusiastic by the performance of the dispute settlement mechanism. So when the DSB entered in parallelism, some of us turned pessimistic. Others, I'm like very much of that, found creative ways to going on. And during these challenging times, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala strongly reminded us lawyers the importance of the WTO as a forum to achieve deals for our commonwealth. So it's not a surprise that so many deals have been achieved in so few time. And it also is not a surprise that representatives of the developing countries are participating strongly to achieve this agreement. So this afternoon, we are lucky to have Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, or as we call it, this is inside joke about the new chairs program, we call us the baby chairs, because there are the mommy chairs, like the chairs that were before us. We were elected just in 2021. We call it our DG. We're really lucky to have our DG with us to discuss these challenges and what is the role to the WTO to face them. We thank our DG for her generosity to be with us on a Sunday. And also we thank our panelists for being also on a Sunday to discuss these matters with us. So let's say, please, DG, we can start with you.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And first, thank you to the Catholic University and our wonderful chair for hosting us this afternoon, and to my fellow panelists, very distinguished, and ambassador in Geneva. Thank you all for being here. I'm surprised to see so many of you on a Sunday afternoon. So this is really great commitment. I think the issue is, what is the role of the WTO and in the face of the many challenges that face the world today? I want to start off by saying we are celebrating 30 years of the WTO, but not just 30 years. We're actually celebrating 80 years of the Bretton Woods. When GATT also came into being, at that time it was supposed to be the International Trade Organization. But the US Congress at the time did not like this idea of an organization that might impinge on its sovereignty. So it didn't come into being, it became GATT. And GATT then became WTO 30 years ago. So we're celebrating 80 and 30, or 78 and 30. So it's a big celebration. And what has happened with the trading system over this time? The multilateral trading system, as part of the globalization of the world, has been a force for good. It was created to stress the interdependence of nations. And the thought was that when nations are interdependent, there will be peace because they are trading with each other. Over this period of time, over these 3-4 decades, the multilateral trading system has contributed to lifting more than 1.5 billion people out of poverty. It has contributed to prosperity in the world. And it is true that maybe not every part of the world benefited as much. Some poor regions and rich countries were left behind, and some poor countries were left behind. And I'll come back to that. But generally, it benefited a whole lot of people, particularly in East Asia. Today, this same multilateral trading system and the WTO, that is the guardian of the rules in the system, controls 75% of world trade. So 75% of world trade today is done on WTO terms, on those rules and agreements, on tariffs, on the most favored nation basis, accorded to members of the WTO. 75% of world trade takes place on these terms. And it assures predictability, stability, fairness, and openness for trade. So when the private sector trades, we were just talking about that, you know when your goods arrive, what sort of tariffs they should face. If we didn't have the WTO, you have a chaotic system in which anyone could charge anything, and consumers would not know at what price they are finally going to end up getting products. So people take the world trading system for granted. It's like the air you breathe. But don't take it for granted, because if it were not there, you would really miss it. The other thing, the WTO helps with some standards. So guaranteeing or trying to be a guardian over health and safety standards for products. When you consume products, you don't even think that they must meet a certain standard of health, safety, and even quality. We have agreements at the WTO on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as well as what we call technical barriers to trade, that guarantees the quality at which products come into countries. But it also assures that members do not use these standards, these measures, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, as arbitrary measures to block trade. So if a country tries to say, no, don't bring this into my country because it doesn't meet this health standard or that, you have a place to come at the WTO to say, no, this is not science-based, this is not according to WTO SPS measures. And then you can have a place to bring your complaint. So remember all of that. I could go on and on. But what I'm trying to say is what you consume and the way you live your life today is shaped very much by trade. And the WTO is the guardian of the rules. The WTO also has the only place in the world where two members can settle trade disputes. It has the dispute settlement system, where if one country contravenes the laws of trade and the agreements that have been made at the WTO, you can bring them to the WTO dispute settlement system. We have a problem now. It's a two-tier system, panel level and appellate body, that the appellate body at this time, the election of judges to the appellate body has been blocked by the US for various reasons and complaints they have. But we are reforming it. We are taking into account the complaints that the US has, not just the US, but some developing country members also have complaints. They feel that the system is not accessible to them. It's too complicated, it's too costly. So we are reforming it now to make it a better dispute settlement system and revive the appellate body, which is very, very important to developing countries. So these are just some of the benefits. Later on, we'll come to the WTO's role in climate change. What is happening, I don't want to hog the floor because I have a lot to say. There are very exciting developments in trade, digital, green, but I'll come back to them later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. First of all, I would like to bid the warmest welcome again to DG Ngozi and her team. We are very honored to have you here in Peru. And of course, we are grateful to Catholic University for hosting us today on a Sunday. I must confess that I am biased towards the WTO. I love WTO, and I will tell you why. I started my diplomatic career 30 years ago in Geneva as a young diplomat, and I was assigned to the WTO. The WTO at that time was starting to operate after long negotiations of the GATT, which because of that was named the General Agreement to Talk and Talk. And so I arrived in Geneva and I said, oh, okay, a multilateral organization is about talking and talking. But then one of the first results I witnessed upon arriving in Geneva was exactly the WTO. Peru, along with Canada and Chile, brought the European Union to the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO on an issue of the labeling of our scallops in the French market. Our scallops were labeled as pétoncle, which is lesser, let's say it means it was a lesser quality as compared to coquille Saint-Jacques, which is the scallops from France. And then the panel at the WTO demonstrated scientifically that they were exactly the same species. And then the European Union, we won the case, and the European Union had to change its internal regulations in order to solve that trade issue. And then at that time I said, oh, okay, so this is an organization whose results can have a real impact on the livelihood of people, because it was our producers that were being harmed because of this discrimination in the European markets. Then 30 years later, what is going on with the WTO? Well, we know that in current times, the whole multilateralism in which the WTO is part of is in crisis. And what happened 30 years later? We had the Ministerial Conference number 12 in Geneva 2 years ago. Very challenging times. We were very lucky that DG Ngozi was in charge, and I have witnessed that because of her drive, we could get a very substantial agreement, which is important for Peru, and Peru was also a key player there, which was the fisheries subsidies agreement of the WTO. It was reached at the very last time, 5 a.m. in the morning. We were there. I was Vice Minister of Foreign Trade at that time, and I led the Peruvian delegation. I was there at 5 a.m. in the morning when Dr. Ngozi said, so agreed. So that was a big success of that ministerial conference. It was very difficult. Nobody thought that there would be a result, and there was a result at the very last minute. And then Ministerial Conference number 13 in Abu Dhabi recently. another big challenge. The results were very modest. I must say that in the case of Peru, we were happy that we could have, that we reached the moratorium on digital trade, which is very important for our small and medium enterprises. And well, there were no, more concrete results, but because of the drive of DG and GOSI, we always say that the WTO is a member-driven organization, but I believe now that it's a DG-driven organization. She has called upon the members, and we have had meetings with her, with different regional groups, and she is heading a process in order to build upon the results of the negotiations in Abu Dhabi in order to have some deliverables this year. One of them should be, and it's very important for Peru, the second round on negotiations on the fisheries subsidies agreement. Peru is a country of the Pacific. We know that we are now heading the APEC. We are part of the Pacific Alliance. We must take care of the Pacific Ocean and all our oceans. And the fishery subsidies agreement aims at cutting these subsidies that that produce overfishing, and that overfishing produces depredation of our oceans. So it's not only an agreement that is important for the countries that are, Peru is the third country in the world in terms of capture of fish, but we do not subsidize. That's a very, a difference from us with other countries. And we were one of the first countries to ratify the agreement. We hope that it will soon enter into force. And so I believe that there is hope. We can continue building upon the results we have achieved in MC13, and we should continue working, not only on specific agreements that are important, but also in reforming some rules of the organization. For example, the rule of consensus is very important, but sometimes it applies as a veto that some other international organizations suffer from also. You know, the Security Council in the United Nations, and that paralyzes an organization. So we should continue working on responsible consensus. I know that this is something that the DG is also working very hard on, and so again, there is hope, and we believe that the drive of DG and GOSI will be crucial for these purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here with Universidad Católica as member of Pacifico University, but also as a former Minister of Trade and a lover of trade. I fell in love with trade when I was only 20-something. And my first job working with a former member of the Minister of Trade of that time, and working on subsidies, on the problems that we have at that time with those called promotional measures that we call it to help people, but at the end was like a big distortion. And we were on that issues, that studies. And from then on, my life had been on trade. Teaching trade from many, many years, so that's my area. I'm working in the public sector and that. And I'm a real believer in multilateralism. It's a real solution. Having these rules coming from WTO is a public good in the sense that economists would think. This is not rival. We cannot exclude anybody. There's no extra cost to have someone using the system. So it's very good for the world to have a system with good rules as WTO. And Peru was there from the inception of WTO, member of the GATT, but also pushing for having these rules well settled in WTO. And here is a very important testimony. As someone that can make a very good testimony of what was this negotiation is Vicky Elmore, who was member of this process. At that time, she was member of the Minister of Trade, and at that time wasn't tourism, but she was member of the Minister of Trade, and she was the negotiator from our part, together with the members of the Foreign Affairs ministries. But of course, from the ministry point of view, was a success that we have at that time. And we inherit her job. We learned a lot from you, Vicky, so I really give you a big applause from here. And here's the thing. Thank you, Ngozi, for coming. You're the, I mean, from almost 15 years, we don't have a DG coming here. But Pascal Lamy was the last to come here to Peru. So I really thank you that you're taking in consideration a country like ours, a middle-income country, suffering the problems of being a middle-income country. Of course, we have special and differential treatment also, but we don't use it that much. We believe in this issue of trade. As a matter of fact, we are presidents of GRULA, thank you, in WTO, and already we mentioned the fishery subsidies, and we are very happy to have this agreement already settled, but it's not enough for us. We want to push it further, as was our commitment from the beginning in 2001. We want to go further to make sure we protect our biomass, we protect our environment, because if there is no equilibrium, there probably will be also other damages to the rest of the world. And let's say this is one of the best things. It's the first time we have an agreement in which we included the environment as part of the trade negotiation. So this is something that we have to really support and keep on working together with you, Ngozi. Also, there are many other issues that we are happy to cooperate. We know that Peru has the presidency of the Financial Services Committee negotiations, so that's fantastic also. We are pushing their issues that are very important, like women inclusion in the financial services. I'm part of an institution here in Peru that we serve women with credit, microcredits for women. And they are in Mexico, in Peru, in Guatemala. And I think pushing this brings people's lives to another level. Women that are in the base of the pyramid can really be free and have better situations, even in front of their husbands. You know, they really feel much better. I saw them, I talked to them, and you can tell that that changed life. But supporting this freedom of in the trade of services related to financial sector is really fantastic. So there are many issues that WTO have developed, but as I mentioned, there are some things in which we feel sad, particularly for people that really believe in WTO and their impact. The incremental progresses are slowing down, and we have to see something changing. That's why the reform is important. That was mentioned by Ana Gervasi, and I think that's very important to start thinking where we have to focus in our reforms. We don't want WTO to die. We want it to be alive and helping people's life. But I think we have to make the people of the developed world particularly commit to this, because the success of the Uruguayan round had to do a lot with the commitment they had. The commitment that the developed world had made possible that many people like us decided to change our policies to more free policies, and we can see the results in Peru. Peru is a successful exporter of fruit and vegetables because we made the reforms. We made the reforms for a market economy system that really works for the people. And that's what we want to do. But we don't want the developed world put in more subsidies, more trade barriers, non-trade barriers there. For example, the due diligence idea, fantastic idea to have environmental and social issues involved in the global value chain. But if you impose a rule that is impossible to commit from a developing world like us, that's not a rule. You're pushing people outside. You're pushing the poor people from the coffee sector or the cocoa sector to be involved, for example, in illegal croppings. It happened before, why not with this kind of attitude? So we have to change that. I know we are afraid of China, but we have to have rules also with China and talk with them. So yes, China is in Peru. China will have a port, but what about having a trade facility? I mean, investment facilitation treatment? It was in the plurilateral decision with more than 100 countries deciding for that, but some country or a couple of countries, like I think was India and South Africa, opposed, and then there was a stop. We want investment facilitation for sure to make sure that everybody has the same treatment, is better off in the reinvestment in the countries, but not imposed by someone else. So this issue of, I believe in multilateralism, but sometimes plurilateralism may help to develop like a stepping stone to the further development of the multilateral agreement. So we have to think about things like that. And of course, we want to see more issues developing in particularly agricultural sector, which is sad to say that probably is the area in which we have less advances since we started in 1995. So I have to say that. And the issues of non-economic objectives that is there now. This morning, when I was like reading issues to prepare for this meeting, I received one email for a friend in Switzerland, which is a professor of trade, and he said, look, Turkey is putting embargoes and the prohibition of trade with Israel. I know we have a problem in Israel, there's a war, it's very sad what is going on, but if one country starts with an embargo, another country starts with an embargo, where is trade going on? How we use this as a non-objective, these are, I know, geopolitical issues that should be addressed, but is WTO or the trade system the way to do it? Or we should look in other ways to address, to look for peace? And everybody said, well, what about the Security Council instead of WTO? So there are many non-economic objectives and many geopolitical issues coming in and disrupting the development of a good system for the world. So I think we have to take them into consideration, but be careful of overusing the system. And of course, I would think that Fernando will have better responses for what is going on in the dispute settlement system. But it's very arbitrary that one country decides to stop having the appellative body working. Maybe it's not perfect. We can go through the reform. I believe we can make it, but not stop the system because other people were using it and we need it. I know the panels are trying to solve with some tricks going there, but we don't need to be jumping the system. We have to have a good system, but not having a veto on it. So I think that that's something we have to follow. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. First of all, let me welcome Dr. Ngozi. It was a pleasure to meet you a few minutes ago. And it's an honor to be here with you, Ambassador Gervasi, Mrs. Arauz, Fernando Pierola, and see so many familiar faces in the auditorium. Asande, former colleagues from the Ministry of Foreign Trade, from Foreign Affairs, professors from different universities, students, and many close friends. Thank you so much to the university, Catholic University, for the invitation. And I must say that I'm also a trade lover. And also, I feel biased because my career started on WTO issues. So I'm also biased in this discussion as a person who believes strongly on the power of multilateralism, especially on trade. I started working on APEC issues when Peru were hosting for the first time APEC. And you know, APEC is a forum where the first topic is supporting multilateral trading system. And 1 year later, I joined the team working on WTO with Mrs. Victoria Elmore. She was my teacher at the ministry, and next to me, my teacher at the university on international trade negotiations. And I think that the topic today has so many things to say that just 1 hour won't be enough. There are so many key global challenges that the world is facing. They're all intertwined, overlapping. They need to have a multidisciplinary approach. But the WTO has that power to convene countries and try to find a solution on those topics. There is an agenda that has been growing and growing in the last years. If I said 10 years ago when I stopped working on WTO issues, there was not a discussion on climate change, industrial policy, trade finance, trade and women empowerment, and many others. And now you see them. And that means that the trade and international trade is evolving constantly, and the rules must be updated at the same pace, if possible. But having said that, we must recognize that the WTO by itself has an enormous value. Dr. Ngozi said the stability, predictability, transparency. I wouldn't say a fair trading system, but a fairer trading system than it was before 1995. And we don't see it in a tangible way. It is a public good, as Mrs. Arauz mentioned. But from time to time, we can see the value of WTO, for example, when we see that threat of protectionism that happened in 28, 29, for the financial crisis, and then with COVID as well, and many other times where WTO was the reason why countries did not apply protective measures, and there was a call from different countries not to implement or restrain from implementing protective measures. So I think that there is a strong value on the WTO and how it protects ourselves under a rule-based system. And we must feel confident that it should still be in that way. It should happen in that way. In Peru, WTO is the cornerstone of the trade policy and trade negotiations. If we have a network of FTAs, it's because it's based on the provisions of the WTO, on the Neighboring Clause, the Article 24 of GATT, the Article 5 of GATT. We have to build on that commitments, always looking to liberalize and facilitate trade, but never go one step back to what's been at the WTO. And I have to comment how the agenda has been addressing many challenges. Now the world has an enormous agenda with the SDGs. And many of the SDGs and the key challenges that try to address has to do with the work of the WTO. One of them has been mentioned by Ambassador Gervasi and Mrs. Arauz, talking about the fishery subsidies and how you can have an outcome that pays attention to a problem under 3 dimensions: environment, economic, but also social, because we're talking about fishermen. So let's say that we need also this kind of outcomes in other areas. Mrs. Arauz mentioned agriculture. It is, I know, one of the top priorities on the WTO agenda. It is the heart of the trade negotiations and the heart of the Doha round at that time. We have seen very small steps, positive steps, such as the elimination of export subsidies, but still the international markets and domestic markets are very distorted. And that's not fair for countries that has made their job and tried to make their markets function under economic terms, not with subsidies, not with distortions. And that's, for example, an area where the WTO can address a key challenge right now, SDG 2, hunger zero, the elimination of hunger around the world. So I hope soon that we can see what for more than 20 years Negotiated at Geneva has been pushing for, market access, but also the elimination or reduction of domestic support, and many other provisions related to export competition. In these intertwined areas in international agenda, I know there are some concerns about the role of WTO on trade vis-a-vis the role of other organizations on environment. But if you see the agreements at the WTO, there is this principle saying that environment and trade are supporting each other and they are not mutually exclusive. So when we work domestically and internationally, we must work with that vision. It's the only way that we can avoid that environmental measures at the end are more trade restrictive or distortive than it could be, and also that they could find a cooperative way of addressing global challenges in the environmental area. It's not a surprise that more and more countries are starting to use rules, non-tariff measures, to discriminate products, not based on their physical characteristics or their quality, but based on the production and process methods. And we must be very careful about that. If you see a regulation discriminating goods based on whether they come or not from a deforested area, how do you define that? There should be a solution globally that gives us a harmonized standard that could provide us certainty on what the rules will be for us. So there are many issues where an international cooperative approach is needed. Otherwise, what we will have is the fragmentation of trade and the fragmentation of rules among different regions or major powers. But I really appreciate that these discussions are being held at the WTO. I saw the topics addressed in the last ministerial conference. They are not only on what was on the agenda, but also discussing plastic pollution, climate change, energy transition, circular economy, and that shows the key role that the WTO can play internationally. So thank you so much, Dr. Ngozi, for being here today. And we hope that what we are expressing in this space, you can bring them to the WTO with a Peruvian perspective, which is the perspective of a country that is a small open economy that has integrated trade into its development agenda for more than 20 years. But we need to convince other countries that that's the path that they should follow if they want a really real development for the inclusion of thousands of people around the world.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be here. I see so many friends, so many colleagues, and I'm very glad that you made it here for Sunday. Thank you very much to the Catholic University for this invitation to this high-level dialogue. It is truly an honor for me to share this panel with Dr. Ngozi, Ambassador Gervasi, Mercedes, and Diego, and to talk about the role of the WTO in addressing global challenges. It could be a very challenging topic in itself, I think. Challenges could be very broad. I think we have experienced a financial crisis in the past years. We have endured pandemics like COVID-19. At present, there is a looming challenge, which is climate change, and there is an imminent projection, the results of which we don't really know for sure. The world is immersed in several trade conflicts, political tensions. There are even armed conflicts that unfortunately have taken away the life of so many people and have created instability in the world economy. So this is the context that the WTO has to face. It's a challenging context. It's a context that has been characterized as a context of polycrisis. And therefore, the question that I think arises is the WTO equipped to deal with this? And I think the answer to that categorically is yes. I think, we have trust in the system. The WTO has demonstrated by large that it's able to provide a positive contribution to addressing global challenges. This has happened, for example, when the international community saw the need to establish a regulatory framework to deal with the sustainability of fishery of marine resources. The WTO delivered an agreement on fishery subsidies. During the times of COVID, remember that there was a need to find a solution so that developing countries would be able to produce vaccines and save so many lives. The WTO very successfully served as a forum in order to seek that solution, and finally, that solution was found. So the WTO has the institutional strength, the WTO has the human capital to deal effectively with these challenges. And that brings me perhaps to a deeper reflection on what could be the underpinning notions, the fundamental tenets that allow the WTO to maintain resilience during these difficult times and to provide a space for this type of global solutions. And I think in the few minutes that I have available, I think I would refer generally to two specific aspects. I think the first of them is that the WTO is perceived by WTO members as a credible and legitimate forum for the conduct of negotiations on trade-related matters. The WTO has the ability to bring together countries from different parts of the world with different ideologies, with different internal political processes, with different visions of the world economy to discuss a wide variety of topics. The current negotiating agenda covers topics as diverse as agriculture, e-commerce, the reform of the WTO, the reform of the dispute settlement process, subsidies of different types, environmental issues, and of course, the expectation is that at some point, if the negotiations work out well, then we could come up with specific commitments that would be stated on the books. So I think the function of serving as a legitimate forum for the global economy, that's a quite important asset of the WTO. And I think the second aspect to which I'm going to refer is the fact that the WTO system is based on rules. And I believe that the rules-based character of the system provides security and predictability, not only to governments, but I think equally or more significantly to the business community. The business community requires legal stability for the planning of investment, for the planning of business. It is also of critical importance to have a rules-based system for those countries that do not have the political power to advance their interests in a political way. So a rules-based system is much more inclusive in that respect than the system that is based purely on the political strength of countries. And certainly from an economic point of view, a rules-based system enhances further economic development overall. Now, a rules-based system, an effective rules-based, or a rules-based system can only be effective if the commitments, if the rights and obligations of members can be enforced. And I think in that respect, the WTO dispute settlement process has been uniquely successful in ensuring the enforceability of WTO commitments, regardless of the levels of developments of the countries or the parties that have been involved in disputes. And this is one of the most distinctive features of the system. This has helped level the playing field for the benefit particularly of those countries that otherwise would have constraints in asserting their rights. I'm referring to a large number of developing countries and least developed countries. I think that this dispute settlement process has been so successful that it has even induced many countries to consider the inclusion of several topics on the multilateral agenda, precisely because of the effectiveness of the dispute settlement process. Now, we know that the dispute settlement process is currently under reform. We hope that countries or members could achieve consensus on the way to move forward in that respect. Now, in the absence of a fully functioning dispute settlement process, what is happening basically is that countries are looking for alternative ways to resolve their disputes. The work of committees and councils in terms of addressing trade concerns have increased in the past years, and that is perhaps a positive scenario, but I think this cannot replace a fully functioning dispute settlement process, which benefits the whole membership, and particularly those members that do not have the political power to resolve their disputes in a political game, let's put it that way. And on that note, I would like also to thank Dr. Ngozi for the support that she has given to the work of the Advisory Center on WTO law, which helps developing countries and least developed countries in understanding the legal framework of the institution and to take advantage of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this efficient management of time. So we have time for a second round and maybe Q&As.
Okay, thank you very much. Fantastic listening to my fellow panelists and a tremendous amount of knowledge in the room. I think perhaps what I'd like to focus on, we've talked a lot about the challenges and touched on some opportunities, but I also would like to touch on some opportunities. From my point of view, every time I think I see a challenge, I always think of the opportunity in the challenge. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities facing trade at the moment that we should be able to seize. And let me start with what is happening in trade. I think everybody will be tired of hearing me say this now, that I believe the future of trade is services, it is digital, it is green, and it must be inclusive. That's what I see as trade. So let me comment on some of these. Goods trade will always be there. It is the bulk of trade, about $24 trillion out of the $30.4 trillion of total trade in goods and services. But services trade, and particularly digitally delivered services trade, is the fastest growing segment of trade. And when we talk of digitally delivered services trade, it's everything from accounting services and professional services you deliver digitally, to streaming and video, to entertainment. This is trade too, when you're providing and consuming these services. And that segment is growing at about 9% per year globally. This is where the opportunity is. And it's very exciting. It's worth $4.25 trillion now, but it is where the future is. So this is an area that Peru, for instance, I've been saying to countries in Latin America, because we also went to Chile and Uruguay, that it's an area of opportunity, because you have this human resources, trained people can also help that you take advantage of this. The Latin American region has only 1.6% of this market, 1.6. The bulk of it is in the US and Europe. So it's a tiny percentage, but what does that mean? It means there's room to grab market share in digitally delivered services. Now, Peru has $1 billion of this trade. The total that you have produced is about $1 billion last year. and you're growing at 7% per annum. So you are slightly below the global average of 9%. Chile is growing at 11% per annum, for instance. But you have the opportunity to grow this area. So whatever you can do to remove the impediments in the way of digital trade, that's what you have to do. Why is it so interesting to me? It's because it's one means to make trade more inclusive. Our research shows that micro, medium, and small enterprises in many developing countries are trading digitally. Young people are delivering entertainment and other services digitally and trading, and they're also consuming. So young people, women are doing this, and that is why we're raising a $50 million fund at the WTO. We launched it at our 13th ministerial 3 months ago in Abu Dhabi to support women in digital trade. And actually, the person managing the fund is right here, Nicole Mensa, my gender advisor. So we want to support women in trade. We want to support micro, medium, and small enterprise. And actually, Peru is, I think, the second highest, if not the highest, in terms of women entrepreneurship in this region. So this is an area in which you're doing well. And I think if you combine your support for women entrepreneurship with digital, you will be doing a fantastic job. So I hope you're getting excited. So you are only $1 billion now. You have the opportunity. Chile is $3 billion. Uruguay is $2.9 billion. You can outstrip them if you work hard, but you must remove all. And I'm very proud that at the WTO we are doing two things. First, Ambassador mentioned it, that we had the moratorium on digital. We created the ecosystem for digital trade by making sure no customs duties are charged on digitally delivered services. And we're able to extend this for another 2 years. So that's one thing we achieved at MC13. Another thing we're doing, there are no rules that govern e-commerce, that govern digital trade. And at the WTO, you mentioned plurilaterals. 90 members are negotiating a plurilateral on e-commerce, on digital trade, and that will create the rules for that system. So there are two things we're doing that are very positive to grab the future of trade. Green, climate change is an existential threat. You're feeling it here in Peru. There is no way you can solve the problem of climate change without trade. You need trade to diffuse the technologies that are used and needed to help solve the climate crisis, be they wind, solar, whatever, renewables or other technologies that may come. AI, you're going to need trade to be able to disseminate technologies. Even within climate change, I'm sure we are going to have AI just as in digital. And it is because trade allows these technologies to scale. And when you scale, the unit costs come down and it is much more affordable. So you need trade for that. You need trade for adaptation. You need trade for mitigation. So there's no, I always maintain you cannot solve the climate crisis without trade. People think of trade as a problem in climate because of the logistics of trade, the shipping, the aviation. Yes, they meet about 3% aviation, 3% of greenhouse gas emissions, and shipping and aviation have to find the right alternative fuels. And they are being worked on, so I'm confident we will find that. But think about trade as a solution. We actually developed a handbook for COP28 that showed 10 trade policy tools that countries can use to help mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll just quickly give you one, just two, very fast. One of them, public procurement. And Peru, very proud, Peru is doing so well. You are a member of the public procurement government. We have an agreement at the WTO called the Government Procurement Agreement that deals with public procurement, makes it transparent, more open for processes and bidding. And one of the things that you have to realize is that public procurement is a $13 trillion business. $13 trillion, 13% of GDP, of global GDP. So if you want to drive green, well, you can use the power of the procurement to purchase green. So this is something we are saying to members who are members of this. Use your public procurement to purchase green and to make those who supply you do so in a green way. Another thing, your tariff regimes. In many developing countries, you find that renewables are disadvantaged. Tariffs on renewable goods are sometimes higher than on goods that use fossil fuels. Maybe not in Peru. I haven't looked at your relative tariffs, but in many developing countries, this is the case. Take a look at your tariff regime to make sure you are favoring renewables, you're favoring things that help you decarbonize and not the other way around. Just two examples, and I could go on and on. Very simple things that governments can do. So green is the future, digital is the future, inclusiveness. We must help women, medium, micro, and small enterprise. And my last point, and then I could go on and on and on, but I'll make my last point. There's an opportunity that is staring us in the face out of adversity. So during the pandemic, we found that global supply chains were fragile, right? Everybody was saying they're having problems with global supply chains. And they said that trade is a problem. When you analyze what happened with global supply chains, you find that, yes, there were vulnerabilities, not because they are bad, but because we had over-dependence on some supply chains for certain sectors and certain goods. Problem was over-dependence, not interdependence. So we must analyze the problem properly. What do I mean? The supply chain for pharmaceuticals and vaccines during the pandemic, right? Everybody was upset because they couldn't get their hands on vaccines fast enough. Or pharmaceuticals, the therapeutics that were needed. 10 countries in the world export 80% of the vaccines. And that is why many developing countries were at the end of the queue waiting. And we could not get our hands on these vaccines. So obviously, pharmaceuticals need to be decentralized and diversified. Critical minerals, 90% of critical minerals are processed in China, 35% come from China. That's over-dependence. You need to decentralize that. Semiconductors and chips. Chinese Taipei, we call it Chinese Taipei. It's really Taiwan to other people. But at the WTO, we call it Chinese Taipei. Almost 90% of semiconductors made in one. So these are sectors that are too concentrated. And then countries began to say, well, we want to reshore things and produce only in our country. We need to only produce with our friends, friend shoring. And I asked them, who is a friend? Your friend today might be your non-friend tomorrow. If the leader of that country changes and you thought you had a friend, you might not have a friend. So let's not think only of friend shoring, okay, or reshoring to ourselves. If you try to produce everything yourself, what happens? You might fail because of climatic or other factors. So let us diversify supply chains to many parts of the world to build resilience. And that is what we are advocating. That's an opportunity for developing countries. We call it re-globalization. It is reimagining globalization to make it work better for the countries and peoples who were not integrated in the first wave of globalization. There are people who are saying globalization doesn't work anymore, let's get rid of it. No, developed countries have benefited from it. When it's our turn, you cannot say, let's do away with it, because you can't compete. Let us reimagine it by re-globalizing and placing supply chains in developing countries. Not only China or China plus one, China and Vietnam. No. How about China plus Peru, China plus Chile, China plus Nigeria, China plus Bangladesh, China plus Morocco? And businesses are already diversifying supply chains in this way. We just want to encourage them to continue to look at developing countries that have the right environment and diversify supply chains. So reglobalization is an opportunity. Don't see supply chains as a problem, see them as an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I must say that in the current crisis of multilateralism that we have already referred to, I believe that the WTO is an organization that is well placed to survive and to continue producing results, because the WTO has already produced and has the potential to continue producing results that affect directly and positively the livelihood of people. We have talked about that some moments ago as well. We must not forget that that our work is for the people. Sometimes politicians forget about that. Sometimes countries forget about that. Organizations forget about that. When politics are badly exercised, they forget that at the end we must work for the people. And I believe the WTO then is well placed because, as I said, it has shown already results. I have referred to some of them. The agreement of fisheries subsidies, for instance, is not only about protecting the environment in our oceans, but also has a direct impact on protecting the livelihood and the environment for our artisanal fishermen. On the same wave, Peru is also part of a plurilateral effort in the WTO, of which 128 members are part of, which is the agreement on investment facilitation for development. We know that investments are so important for developing countries. We hope that this plurilateral effort can soon become a multilateral platform. And Dr. Ngozi also mentioned the empowerment of women through trade and also through financial inclusion, which is, of course, an issue very dear to Dr. Ngozi, and we must continue working for having concrete results on that. I believe that an organization, a multilateral organization, can survive as long as it can continue producing results and showing people that its work is relevant for their well-being. Peru will continue working on these efforts along with Dr. Ngozi and her team and all the members of the WTO with that aim. Let's not forget that our aim is people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more with Dr. Ngozi on their proposals. I think exactly the issues of being a greater participant in services, for example, is an issue for us. And to have a green economy, for sure, we have 70% of our territory is the Amazon, 70%. So we are committed not have deforestation. We want to have protection of our forest, but we have to make it in the right way, not imposing things, because we have to reduce the risk of bringing people into the process of destroying the forest, and we don't want that. So making it green and inclusion, as you mentioned. So these three focus are fantastic, are right into the track. In the term trees of service, I would say some things that we should do inside. For example, we don't have good statistics. We want to make any study on that, and it's very difficult. We can't. We passed a law after 10 years of fighting with the Minister of Finance. I was Minister of Trade, and I fight with the Minister of Finance.
Don't fight with finance. I was a
Yeah, yeah.
Minister of Finance.
Me too, me too. So I was Minister of Finance, and my people inside didn't want to pass a law in which we exonerated the export of services. I mean, I was Minister of Trade, I was fighting with them. And then I was Minister of Finance, and I was fighting with them. 10 years later, I was Vice President of this country. Finally, we passed a law in which we exonerated the export taxes. It was ridiculous. We shouldn't be paying export taxes. But they didn't put anything about registration and facilitation in the law. So we are not sure if we're using that particular legislation that allow us to export more services. So this is something we have to talk with the Ministry of Finance now and tell them, look, we have to improve this because we want to be better exporter of services and bring opportunities for our people in this area. So this is something that we should do. That's statistics and working with the Minister of Finance for doing that. In terms of sustainability, and I appreciate the work that WTO with ITC and UNCTAD are working on an issue we call VSS, Voluntary Sustainability Standards. These are the standards that are settled by the firms, not by the governments. And the three institutions are working together. I'm a member of the Academic Council. I'm co-chair of the Academic Council. We're making a lot of studies on that, how to harmonize that, how to facilitate the issues that they can bring, because they're good, because they're voluntary, they can bring to our people when we are exporting. We use them very much in Peru also. But we have to have clear rules. There are the growth of that, the VSS is tremendous. ITC has registered that. But recently we have seen some kind of saturation of the system, and we have to see how we can really harmonize the process so we can use it in the right manner. So firms have the information about the value, as was mentioned, of the products in their quality, but not only on that, they are really looking and protecting the environment in the right way. Are they really taking care of the labor force? Are they really introducing human rights things that are important? If we protect that, it's perfect, but do it in the right way. So I really appreciate the work that WTO is making on that because it helps. Sustainability is an issue that we have to have clearly from the beginning in our job as public workers or also in the academia and the private sector. And finally, I would like to mention the issues on, we want a green economy in the right way. What is happening with this nearshoring, reshoring, friendshoring is that everything is done with subsidies. And we don't have the money. I mean, the developing world doesn't have the money to invest on that. After the COVID situation, many least developed countries and middle-income countries has increased the debt. So what do they want? They're putting billions of dollars, $50 billion for greener cars, for more semiconductors and things like that in one country. Then the competition comes from, that's US. Then they come the Europeans and they put that billions of dollars there. Okay, so all the industry on electric cars will be there, or all the industry will be in only the developed world. What happened with the rest of the world? How can we develop these industries? Why there is nothing there to the possibilities? We cannot compete with subsidies. We cannot compete with funny anti-dumping rules either. We have to have good rules in that. And we see anti-dumping growing also because they don't want solar panels coming from China. They don't want, so we want balance. So this is an issue that we want a greener economy, but we want also a balanced trade in which we, developing world, can produce the right way and really create new things, because there's people here that have the ability. I have seen young engineers and at the Universidad del Pacífico or Universidad Católica doing things that are, oh, wow, this is amazing. They're creating things. But how can they do business with this if they have these barriers of trade, or they have this impossibility of getting the financial money, the money to come to them to invest in their projects? That this technology that they are developing, it will be cut because someone else can copy them and take the patent or things like that. We have to protect that. In talking about patents and talking about intellectual property rights, that was an issue that Peru always had been looking for, the protection of the traditional knowledge and our genetic resources. This is an issue that Peru was leading with many other countries, but we are fighting against pharmaceuticals, against other issues, and we want to keep on that. We really think that that's the way we can make sure that the indigenous people have the payment for the knowledge, and we have to work on that together. So WTO is the place to work in that matter, and we will keep on fighting for this kind of thing. So it's the digital economy, very modern, but at the same time, the traditional knowledge of our people, based on our genetic resources. Particularly, genetic resources are very important. I'm also part of an institution called the Global Crop Trust, in which we support gene banks. And really, if there is trade, we can make sure that this exchange of knowledge based on the development of science in gene banks is going on. I mean, I've just been in Morocco, seeing these gene banks and watching of the development of fantastic things. We have here more than, and really, we have the National Gene Bank with INEA, and we have the International Potato Center here also. So there is a lot of development and knowledge that should be promoted and developed to have produce and something new in terms of things that can happen. We can produce recyclable bags, for example, from potato potato skins, for example. We can do a lot of things based on our produce, having potatoes, but it's technology and science together and trade that can cooperate on that. So I think there is mainly possibilities, but we have to have strong WTO for doing that. Thank you, Ngozi.
Thank you, and I want to thank you, Dr. Ngozi, for twisting this conversation from challenges into opportunities, which is a positive way, especially for Peruvian entrepreneurs and enterprises, to see that WTO can serve them, but they have to adapt themselves in order to benefit from world trade. And I agree that the world is moving into a digital economy, green, inclusive, based on services. And from time to time, you see that people say, no, we have to move into manufacturing. But yeah, it's important. But manufacturing is also about services right now, and how the services are embodied into the goods, and especially manufacturing. So the certification of manufacturing, or the certification of goods. And there we have many tasks domestically. I agree with Mrs. Arauz about the need of statistics, which may help us to make a more precise decision in the definition of public policies. But the WTO and OECD has a tool that could serve us, which is the trading value-added database, which I think that, and especially for the academia, there is a lot of work to do internally to analyze that data and see what's happening for Peru in the inclusion into global value chains and regional value chains, and which role we're playing in the value chains internationally. So there is something that we should work internally. And talking about services, it's around 10% of our exports. more and more modern services, knowledge-based services, which are very linked to digital services. But we need to provide them also the support as we have been doing to the producers of goods. So sometimes, being a former public officer, we always think about goods, and then we forget about services. And there is a small team negotiating services for the FTA or WTO, and there one person working on the development of policies for services, and trade promotion the same. It's a small team working on trade promotion of services. So we have to take a special look into services because at the end, one of our main advantages is our people and their knowledge. We have to invest in education, in health services, and then that will be reflected in more export of services through our to our people. And finally, I really like one of your advices: analyze the problems properly. And that's something where the WTO can help us, because you give us a framework, which is the legal text. So here is my book, the Bible. We call it at the Ministry of Foreign Trade the Bible. So I took it with me for more than 10 years when I was working at the Ministry of Foreign Trade. But still, I have it over my desk at the Sport Association. And from time to time, I take a look and check if some company says, oh, I don't think that country is doing the right thing. I say, oh, let's check what's happening. But what I really like about the legal text of the WTO is that, yes, they're legal texts, but has a very strong economic content. So the principle of non-discrimination and the idea that you can achieve public objectives on health, environment, among others, but you have to do it in a way that is not discriminatory or is the less in the less distortive way. So you provide us, the WTO provide us that tool that should not only be used by the officers at the Ministry of Foreign Trade, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but by other ministries, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Energy, in order to avoid ourselves to apply measures that at the end are not useful for our own development. And of course, we want policies that are evidence-based. But sometimes on trade, let me say that, sometimes people say that the solution or the easiest solution is a trade measure. But if you analyze the problem properly, that's populism. That's the fastest, the easiest. The right way to analyze things is to see what is the root of the problem. And then you will see that the solution is not a subsidy. The solution is not increasing tariffs. The solution is not prohibiting the exporting or the importing of a certain good. But you need to find another measure to solve the problem. And on the other hand, you not always have a crystal ball to see the results of the measures that you're applying. So you have to work on a kind of counterfactual scenario. But almost never trade is the solution. Could be part of the solution, but never is the solution for a problem. So analyze the problem properly. I think that is a very good advice for all of us that are involved on trade matters.
Well, thank you very much. I'm highly surprised by the fact that Diego brought the WTO agreements here on a Sunday. Given the fact that it's Sunday afternoon, I don't really want to keep you that long here, so I'm going to make a very concise statement. I think I'm very glad that Dr. Ngozi brought back the issues of opportunities. Opportunities not only focusing on challenges, but also looking at those windows that open, that should perhaps the system should seize. And I believe in that respect that the question here is how to seek opportunities from the challenges that we have experienced. I think there is a question of growing, from crisis. And I think I'm going to refer generally to three specific aspects that I think we should be mindful of. Firstly, during the times of COVID, as we all know, physical presence was not possible for obvious reasons. In the field of services, this gave the opportunity to many entrepreneurs to provide services in a digital way. And certainly this helped, the development of small and medium enterprises in the world, an option that was somehow, a little bit limited. We know that in the field of services, for example, the movement of people is constrained by several requirements from countries, visas, entry requirements, and so on and so forth. But given the situation of COVID, given the fact that it was necessary to provide remote access to services, a huge opportunity for developing countries got opened. And as Dr. Ngozi was saying, this is an area that should be exploited. I believe that this is an area where developing countries can reveal their comparative advantage. We have a good number of professionals who are heavily competent to deliver services in many areas of knowledge. There are two questions I think that perhaps are relevant at this point. One is the question of connectivity, which is basically a question of infrastructure. And this is something that, of course, goes beyond the realm of the WTO system. Perhaps some like cooperation with other international organizations like ITU, the World Bank, might be necessary in this respect. But there is another area for which I think the WTO could play a significant role. And this is the question of having a greater regulatory framework. Now, there are ongoing discussions in the WTO concerning e-commerce. Certainly, there are many issues that have to be explored here, like, for example, the question of acceptance of extenders, the question of cybersecurity. And I think it's very important that given the opportunity that is open to developing countries and also to small and medium enterprises, that they are not left out of the discussions in this field. And I think in that respect, the WTO, given the fact that it's the house of these discussions, I think should provide those conditions that would ensure, let's say, the inclusiveness of all relevant WTO stakeholders in the discussion. Another challenge that I think has given the opportunity to grow, I think in many respects, is the question of climate change. Certainly, this is something that we just have in front of us. I think every year we feel that the weather is getting warmer, and governments require to take action. And the situation is quite pressing. And in the past, perhaps the perspective, they were saying that the WTO we have now is different from the WTO we had 10 years ago. And this is true. I think the view concerning trade has changed. Trade in the past was seen as the no friend of measures taken for the protection of the environment necessarily. Now there's an opportunity that's open to see trade in a more constructive way. Trade as providing some tools that can help governments, that can help WTO members in order to enhance their environmental protection policies. Dr. Ngozi was referring to the big leverage we get through public procurement. Countries can take advantage of that in order to purchase greener goods, and also the tool that is provided to the tariff regime of countries. Certainly, countries can make use of the regulatory space that they have in terms of their tariff policies in order to provide the necessary incentives if they so wish. There is another issue that I think has arisen out of the climate change debate, and it's the question of subsidies. And I know that this is a very contentious topic, but I think that it's very positive that members are considering the discussion of this, a discussion, an open discussion on what is good and what is bad to be subsidized. I think that is necessary. And then the third topic, the third challenge or crisis that I think may lead to growth, I think is the question of dispute settlement. We know that the dispute settlement process is going through an impasse. We know that we don't have the two-tier dispute settlement process working 100%. And I think this has opened the opportunity for members to explore different alternative means, different solutions. We have been discussing with Dr. Ngozi before the fact that there are some other means available out there. Some of them are even set out in the DSU, like mediation, conciliation. And certainly, I think this is something on which WTO members should further reflect upon. I think there may be perhaps some instances where, for example, the good offices or the mediation by the DG could serve a very constructive role in that context. I know that in the WTO dispute settlement reform discussions, there is also, some specific chapter on that matter. But I think certainly, I think this is something that perhaps should even be considered, for specific action in concrete disputes. And I think with this, I thank you very much, and then I'll pass back the floor to Victor.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm really sad. I want to apologize because in 2 minutes we don't have time for proper Q&As. But please let me compensate you to give it these 2 minutes to DG Ngozi so we can compensate you and close the session.
Oh, really? Can we take one question? Who has just one question?
You want to take one? Yes?
Yeah.
First question, okay.
No, you are too experienced. We will not ask you. We have to take a student. Okay.
Take from the students.
So thank you very much, Dr. Ngozi and the outstanding panelists for this enriching knowledge sharing. So my name is Fiorella Gastulo. I am an international relations undergraduate at BOOK. And going a step before women participation in entrepreneurship, we have been discussing in class that during the globalization project, there has emerged a new profile of the working base. So for example, in the East Asian region, there's these young women which are vulnerable to inadequate work conditions, low salaries, talking about, for example, the wage gap, and also gender-based discrimination and violence in their working environment. So, and this new profile seems to have extended to also the Latin American region. So my questions go, which is the role of the WTO to tackle these new issues? Which are the newest implementations, for example, international standards that meet the consensus to tackle these issues that come with the evolution of trade that you have been discussing? And lastly, for our national representatives, also I would like to ask, which is the national diagnosis of the status of women working, for example, in the production industry, for example, in the agriculture sector? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that multifaceted question. Very clever to wrap as many questions. But of course, the role of women is of great concern. I have to tell you, the WTO is not the forum to solve all of these problems. It's not really within its context, but I'll try to come up at it another way. First of all, our research has shown that women who work in exporting sectors earn 3 times as much, 2.8 times to be exact, as those who sell domestically. So, and that exporting firms tend to employ more women than those who just sell internally. So we were just looking at comparators. So all in all, it seems on balance that women being involved in trade and in exporting sectors tends to increase their income and therefore helps their family and their well-being more. That being said, it is also true that we know sectors where women are in these exporting sectors are not receiving the best wages. We can think of textile and garment workers in Bangladesh, for example, where there is a significant wage gap and working conditions are not so good. This is an issue of labor rights. And this is something that I feel, what Ambassador said here, that WTO trade is about people and WTO is about people. Do you know the purpose of the WTO? To enhance living standards, to help create jobs, and to support sustainable development. That's what attracted me to the job, because it's all about people. So we should care that women are in working conditions that are not appropriate or adequate. And the issue is, can WTO be the organization that can do something about it? We don't have that mandate, but we can definitely work with the ILO. And that is what I do. Where we do not have the mandate, I seek to collaborate with my colleagues in other organizations to try and deliver for developing countries. If you come to the WTO now, you mention labor, many countries will jump on your back and say, this is not in our mandate. So you have to come about it sometimes in a subtle way. So that's what we are cooperating. We cooperated with ILO, for instance, to look at the impact of the pandemic on women. And we did a study. So those are the things. Intellectual property, I just want to take a minute to say, it's not what you asked, but just to let you know that the DG of the WTO, DG of WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organ, and the DG of WHO, the three of us have a tripartite agreement to try to help developing countries use intellectual property in a more beneficial way, by helping them build the legal and regulatory framework that can permit them to do that. Is another example of how we cooperate. So that's what I can tell you. I'm totally not in support of women earning less. They shouldn't. Or being mistreated in the workplace. They shouldn't.
Now, as Dr. Ngozi mentioned, women in trade are much better off because they are formal employments. They are formal, so we make it clear. And that's the problem. Usually what we have is that many people are left behind in the informal sector. We have a law that was okay for the agricultural exports in terms of facilitating the in and out of people to the agricultural sector because they work on seasons. So it was very easy for them to move from cropping to going to the embalajes and moving from one place to another. They were paying higher salaries for sure, much higher than the average salary that we have, the minimum salary, much higher in many of these places. But what happened is that we transformed the law in a very rigid law in the labor sector, which is silly, because what we need to do is to include those people that are outside to this process. We were having a very interesting process of small firms exporting with right certificates. I was talking of VSS, Voluntary Sustainability Standards, with the right certificates that fair trade, like organic trade, environmental issues that were addressed through these certifications. But they were small firms, and now they may exclude it because the law has changed to be too rigid for small farmers. So that's the issue of having a whole view of what trade can bring to us. Next, the export in the agricultural sector for Peru was something that really improved the lives of many women. I've been visiting places in which people were saying, my mother was collecting fruits. Then myself, I'm the new engineer. So that's the change you're seeing. And they're using circular agriculture. So they use all the environmental things that you say, wow, this is like a scientific thing that you never saw before, you know, saving water, using less pesticides. We have to bring up that almost 70% or more maybe of people that are in the agricultural sector in that area that is informal, that is less protected. That's the people we have to be looking for and helping to be in the formal sector and probably exporting their potatoes, probably exporting their yuccas, probably exporting, they're exporting quinoa, exporting, I mean, all our own traditional food that is there and it make our food famous, our gastronomy so famous. But sometimes it's not in the market because we exclude a lot of people in the family business. We have to include that family business, family farms, into the process of feeding ourselves and also feeding the world.
Thank you very much. Also, in order to compensate, I just wanted to tell you that in 2 weeks, the World Chairs Program of Latin America will hold in the conference of the colloquium of all the Latin American chairs. We're going to work on the topic of trade and gender, but other WTO-involved issues. So please, we're going to have DDG Angela Eller with us, so you can continue discussing this topic, maybe more in a close way. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you, DG. Thank you to the panelists, or in Spanish. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias. So just stay a little bit for the formal picture so we can send it to Geneva. So our friend will tell us how to do. And while he's organizing the picture, I want to also to thank the people who was in the back helping this to realize. I want to say thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you to the MINCETUR. Thank you especially to Alejandro Matsuno, who did a lot of work behind. Thank you also in the communications to Anthony and to David. Guys, without you, it would not be possible. Thank you to everyone who was working with us this year. Thank you. Yes, it's recording. It's in Facebook of the Maestría de Derecho Internacional Económico. So you can use it for the classes. So if you could just please stand up. She's gonna make a selfie with all the public.
Oh, that's great. How will we do? We should like this. We have to.
Claro, no, claro. Apoyarte con todo. Sí, podemos hacer la mitad también con la de Lima. Sí,